The doors to the 60-story Hughes Tower locked at exactly 1:14 p.m. Nobody got in, nobody got out. Not the board of directors, not the city's financial elite. Why? Because on the 42nd floor, a billionaire alpha CEO watched his 4-year-old son cling to a bruised, exhausted courier. The boy looked up, eyes wide, and called the stranger Papa. The alpha didn't call security. He locked down the building. This is what happens when ruthlessness meets desperation. The lobby of Hughes Tower was designed to make a person feel small. It was an expansive cavern of white marble, brushed steel, and acoustic perfection that swallowed the sound of footsteps. Laith Finch felt smaller than most. He stood dripping on the pristine floor mat, rainwater pooling off the hem of his cheap nylon jacket. His boots squeaked. The cardboard box in his hands was heavy, reinforced with industrial tape, and the shipping label was smeared from the storm outside. He shifted his weight, trying to ignore the dull, throbbing ache at the base of his skull. His heat suppressants were generic. They cost $18 a bottle at the corner pharmacy, and they tasted like chalk and battery acid. They also barely worked, leaving him in a perpetual state of low-grade exhaustion, his biology constantly fighting the chemical cage he kept it in. Executive floor, the alpha at the security desk said without looking up from his monitor. The guard pushed a temporary access card across the polished granite counter. The man's scent was a faint, arrogant musk. Elevator Bank C. Do not wander. Drop the package with the assistant and come straight back down. You have 12 minutes before the badge expires. Got it, Laith muttered. He snatched the card. He didn't have the energy to snap back. He was 2 hours behind on his route, his delivery van was illegally parked in a loading zone 3 blocks away, and his left knee was killing him. The elevator ride was a silent, stomach-dropping ascent. 42 floors in under 30 seconds. When the heavy doors slid open, Laith stepped out into a completely different world. The air up here was different. It didn't smell like the city. It smelled like filtered oxygen, expensive paper, and the sharp, undeniable undertone of a high-tier alpha. The scent was ozone and crushed cedar. It made the hairs on Laith's arms stand up. His suppressed Omega instincts kicked in immediately, a quiet alarm bell ringing in the back of his mind telling him to lower his eyes and make himself small. He gritted his teeth, hoisted the heavy box higher against his chest, and walked down the silent, carpeted hallway. There was no assistant at the front desk. "Hello," Laith called out. His voice sounded thin, swallowed by the thick carpet and the heavy velvet drapes. "Delivery." Silence. Laith checked the label. Alvaro Hughes. Personal. Hand deliver. He sighed, shifting the box again. "Look, I'm just going to leave it on the desk. You have to sign the digital log later, all right?" He pulled his scanner from his belt, stepping toward the sleek, curved reception desk. Then he heard the footsteps. They were rapid, light, and frantic. The slap of bare feet against hardwood. Laith turned just as a small mass collided hard with his shins. "Whoa!" Laith staggered back, dropping the scanner and barely managing to keep a grip on the heavy package. He looked down. It was a kid, a boy, maybe 4 years old, wearing oversized gray sweatpants and a rumpled t-shirt. His platinum blonde hair was a mess, sticking up in every direction. The boy was trembling violently. He had a tight grip on the fabric of Laith's wet pants, his face buried against Laith's knee. "Hey," Laith said, his voice instantly dropping its irritation. He carefully set the box down on the floor and crouched. The boy flinched, shrinking back a fraction of an inch, but he didn't let go of Laith's pant leg. Laith caught a whiff of the kid's scent. It was unformed, typical for a child, but laced with a sharp, sour spike of sheer terror. Beneath the fear was the soft, milky scent of vanilla. It hit Lade squarely in the chest. "Hey buddy," Lade said softly. He didn't touch the kid. He kept his hands visible, resting them on his own knees. "It's okay. Where are your shoes? It's kind of cold up here." The boy peeked out from behind his own arms. His eyes were a startling, icy blue. They were wide, red-rimmed and filled with tears that spilled silently down his cheeks. He stared at Lave. He stared at the bruised line along Lade's jaw, the dark circles under his eyes, the cheap rain-soaked collar around his neck. Lade gave him a tired, crooked smile. "You lost? Or just running away from a boring math tutor?" The boy didn't answer. Instead, he took a step forward. His small trembling hands reached out and gripped the front of Lade's wet jacket. He buried his face in Lade's chest, right over his heart. Lade froze. His hands hovered in the air. Okay. We're doing hugs now." He awkwardly patted the boy's back. The kid felt fragile, like a bird made of hollow bones. "Where's your Toby?" The voice cracked through the hallway like a gunshot. It wasn't loud, but it possessed a dense, physical weight that made the air pressure in the room drop. Lade snapped his head up. A man stood at the far end of the corridor. He was tall, dressed in a charcoal suit that fit with terrifying precision. His face was a study in hard angles, a sharp jaw, a straight nose, eyes the exact same icy blue as the child currently clinging to Lave. But it wasn't the man's appearance that made Lade's breath catch in his throat. It was the scent. The ozone and crushed cedar from the elevator rushed into the room, concentrated and suffocating. It was pure, unadulterated alpha dominance. It wasn't an aggressive spike, it was simply a state of being. The man didn't have to try to project authority. He was authority. Alvaro Hughes. Lade knew the face from the business magazines left in the break room at the depot. The billionaire. The ruthless architect of corporate takeovers. A man notorious for dismantling legacy companies without batting an eye. The boy, Toby, stiffened against Lade's chest. His small hands tightened their grip on the wet nylon of Lade's jacket until his knuckles turned white. "Toby," Alvaro said again. He took a measured step forward. His face was an unreadable mask, but his eyes were locked on Lave. The gaze was flat, heavy as a concrete block. "Come here." The boy shook his head. He pressed himself harder into Lave. Lade swallowed hard, his throat felt like sandpaper. Mr. Hughes, I think he just got a little spooked." Lade tried to gently pry the boy's fingers off his jacket. "Come on, kiddo. Go to your dad." Toby resisted. With a sudden, surprising strength, the 4-year-old tilted his head back, looked Alvaro dead in the eye, and then looked up at Lave. The boy opened his mouth. His voice was a raspy whisper, and used in fragile. "Papa." The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't a casual misidentification. The boy said it with a finality that made the hair on the back of Lade's neck stand up. He said it like he was claiming a territory. Lade's heart hammered against his ribs. He looked at the kid, then at the billionaire. I'm not. I'm just the delivery guy." Alvaro Hughes didn't blink. He stopped walking. He looked at his son, then he looked at Lave. The icy blue eyes dragged over Lade's cheap clothes, the worn-out collar, the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Alvaro reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black phone. He pressed a single button, raising it to his ear. He didn't break eye contact with Lave. "Lock the building," Alvaro said quietly. "All exits. No exceptions." The sound of the lockdown was something Lathe felt before he actually heard it. It was a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the floorboards, the sound of heavy steel blast doors sliding into place across the lobby exits 42 stories below. The elevators chimed simultaneously, locking into their bays. Panic, sudden and sharp, flared in Lathe's chest. "Whoa, hey!" Lathe said, his voice rising an octave. He took a step back, but Toby's grip on his jacket was like a vice. The kid stumbled with him, refusing to let go. "What do you mean, lock the building? I have a van in a loading zone. I have 14 more stops on my route." "You can't just—" "I just did," Alvaro Hughes said. His voice was entirely devoid of inflection. He slipped his phone back into his tailored pocket. Behind Alvaro, a frantic woman in a gray dress burst out of a side office. She was panting, her face pale. An Omega by her scent, smelling of panicked chamomile. "The nanny!" "Mr. Hughes, I am so sorry," she gasped, rushing forward. "He slipped past me when I was preparing his lunch. He's so fast, Alvaro held up a single hand. The gesture was minimal, barely a lift of the fingers, but the nanny snapped her mouth shut instantly, freezing in place. Alvaro walked toward Lathe. With every step, the dense oppressive scent of cedar and ozone grew stronger. It pushed against Lathe's artificial barriers, squeezing his lungs. Lathe instinctively backed up until his shoulders hit the edge of the marble reception desk. He was trapped. Alvaro stopped exactly 3 feet away. Close enough to be a threat, far enough to maintain a clinical observation. He looked down at Toby. The boy had buried his face in Lathe's stomach now, his small shoulders trembling. "Toby hasn't spoken a single word in 2 years, Alvaro said." His tone was conversational, yet it carried a lethal edge. Lathe blinked, caught off guard. "What?" 2 years, Alvaro repeated. His eyes shifted from his son to Lathe. "Not since his mother died. Dozens of specialists, child psychologists, neurologists. Nothing." Alvaro tilted his head slightly. The movement was predatory, calculating. "And yet, a delivery driver walks out of the elevator, and my son speaks." "I don't know anything about that," Lathe said. He kept his voice low, trying not to agitate the boy further, but his heart was beating a frantic rhythm against his ribs. "He bumped into me. That's it. Look at me, man. I'm wearing a uniform that smells like wet dog and diesel exhaust. Do I look like a miracle worker?" Alvaro didn't smile. He took in the details. The frayed edges of Lathe's jacket. The dark bruising under his eyes. The cheap plastic scent blocker collar around his neck, half hidden by his shirt. "You smell like synthetic suppressants," Alvaro noted dryly. "The cheap kind. The kind that slowly damages the liver over a decade." Lathe bristled. A spark of anger finally broke through his fear. "Yeah, well, we can't all afford the bespoke Swiss injections, Mr. Hughes. Some of us just have to buy off the shelf so we can keep our jobs and pay rent. Now, tell your kid to let go of me before I get fired for missing my delivery window." Alvaro's eyes narrowed by a fraction of a millimeter. It was the only sign that Lathe's defiance registered. "Elena," Alvaro said, not looking back at the nanny. "Yes, sir?" She squeaked. "Gather Toby's things. The building remains locked. Cancel my afternoon meetings. Mr. Hughes, what about the board meeting at 3? Cancel it." "Hey," Lathe snapped, entirely losing his patience. He looked down at the boy. "Buddy, Toby, I have to go. You have to let go of me now, okay?" Lathe placed his hands gently on Toby's shoulders and tried to push him back. As soon as he applied pressure, Toby let out a sound. It wasn't a cry, it was a high, thin keen of absolute distress. It was a raw, primal noise that bypassed Lath's ears and struck directly at his suppressed biology. Before Lath could stop himself, a low, rumbling purr vibrated in his chest, an involuntary, instinctual Omega response to calm a distressed pup. Lath slapped a hand over his own mouth, horrified. Alvaro's posture changed instantly. The alpha's shoulders squared, his spine straightening. The scent of ozone spiked in the hallway, sharp as a crack of lightning. It was an involuntary reaction of his own, responding to the Omega purr. The billionaire stared at Lath, a new intense focus burning in his icy eyes. "Well," Alvaro said softly. "That complicates things." "It was an accident," Lath stammered, his face burning hot with humiliation. "I didn't mean to do that. The suppressants, they wear off sometimes when I'm tired. Please, just let me go." "No," Alvaro said. "You can't kidnap me. I am detaining a potential security risk who has somehow triggered an unprecedented psychological reaction in my heir," Alvaro countered smoothly. He gestured toward a heavy set of double doors down the hall. "My office. Now. Bring him with you." "I'm not carrying your kid," Lath spat, even as his arms reflexively wrapped around Toby to support his trembling weight. "You already are," Alvaro pointed out coldly. He turned his back on them and began walking toward the doors. "You have 30 seconds before I have security drag you in there." I imagined Toby would find that distressing. "The choice is yours, Mr. Finch." Alvaro glanced at the scanner on the floor. "Finch." Lath stood frozen for 5 seconds. He looked at the elevator bay, knowing it was locked. He looked down at the boy clinging to him like a life raft. He felt the heavy, terrifying weight of the Alpha's command settling over the floor. "Damn it," Lath whispered. He hitched Toby up a little higher on his hip. The boy immediately buried his face in Lath's neck, taking a deep, shuddering breath of Lath's scent, pushing past the chemical blocker to find the natural scent underneath. Lath sighed, a long defeated sound, and followed the billionaire down the hall. Alvaro Hughes's office was massive, dominated by floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a dizzying view of the city's gray, rain-slick skyline. The room was aggressively minimalist. Black leather, dark oak, brushed steel. There were no personal photos, no clutter. Just a massive desk and an arrangement of severe-looking couches in the center of the room. Alvaro walked behind his desk but didn't sit. He stood by the window, watching Lath as he awkwardly navigated the space with Toby still plastered to his side. "Sit," Alvaro commanded. Lath dropped onto the edge of one of the black leather couches. It groaned softly under his weight. Toby remained in his lap, curling into a tight ball, his face hidden in the folds of Lath's damp jacket. The kid's breathing was finally starting to even out, growing slow and heavy. "He's falling asleep," Lath muttered, afraid to speak too loudly. "Exhaustion," Alvaro stated, turning to fully face them. He leaned against the edge of his desk, crossing his arms. He looked immaculate, not a hair out of place, not a wrinkle in his suit. It made Lath feel acutely aware of the mud drying on the sides of his boots. His heart rate spiked. The adrenaline crash is putting him under. Silence stretched between them. The only sound was the faint hum of the city through the thick glass and the quiet, rhythmic breathing of the child. Lath awkwardly rubbed a hand up and down Toby's back. He didn't want to. He wanted to distance himself. But every time he stopped, Toby would tense. So Lath kept doing it. "So," Lath said, his voice laced with defensive sarcasm to cover his nerves. "Are you going to ask me how much I'm being paid for corporate espionage? Because I can tell you right now, $22 an hour doesn't cover kidnapping the boss's kid." Alvaro didn't take the bait. His gaze was analytical, mapping every inch of Lathe's face. "Who do you work for, Finch?" "Global Express Logistics," Lathe said, pointing at the faded logo on his chest. "I cover the downtown sector. I deliver packages. I go home. I sleep. I repeat." "You have no prior association with my family? My ex-wife's family?" "I don't even know your ex-wife's name, man." "It was Victoria. She died in a plane crash 2 years and 4 months ago." Alvaro said it without a trace of emotion, like he was reciting a stock market fluctuation. Toby was in the terminal with the nanny, waiting for her to arrive. When the news broke, the terminal went into chaos. He stopped speaking that day. Lathe stopped rubbing Toby's back for a fraction of a second. A heavy knot formed in his stomach. He looked down at the mop of blonde hair. "Jesus, I'm sorry," Lathe said quietly. And he meant it. He knew what it was like to lose everything all at once. Alvaro studied him. The lie detector intensity in the Alpha's eyes seemed to dial down just a fraction. Alvaro pushed off the desk and walked slowly toward the couch. He sat down on the chair opposite Lathe, leaning forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Up close, the Alpha's scent was dizzying. Lathe's lungs felt tight. He had to consciously remind himself to breathe through his mouth. "I have spent 7 figures on specialists for him," Alvaro said, his voice dropping into a low, rumbling register. "Neurologists said there was no physical damage. Psychologists said it was selective mutism driven by severe trauma. They introduced him to surrogate Omegas. Gentle, trained professionals. He ignored them." He sat in the corner of the room and stared at the wall. Alvaro leaned a little closer. His icy eyes locked onto Lathe's brown ones. "Then you walk out of an elevator, a stranger, smelling of cheap chemicals, rain, and stress, and within 10 seconds he not only initiates physical contact, but he speaks. He calls you Papa." Alvaro tilted his head. "Explain it to me." "I can't," Lathe said, shrinking back into the leather. "I don't know. Are you carrying a child of your own? Is there a pheromone shift?" "No, God no," Lathe shuddered at the thought. "I'm not bonded. I don't have kids. I don't want kids." "Then why did he react to you? How am I supposed to know?" Lathe snapped, his frustration finally boiling over. He glared at the billionaire. "Maybe he just wants someone who looks like a mess. You live up here in this sterile glass box, looking like you step out of a dry cleaner every morning. Everything is perfect. Everything is cold. Have you ever considered that maybe the kid just wanted something real? Something that doesn't smell like money and cedarwood?" The moment the words left his mouth, Lathe regretted them. "You didn't yell at an alpha like Alvaro Hughes. You didn't insult a man who could ruin your life with a single phone call." Lathe braced himself, waiting for the heavy, crushing wave of dominant pheromones, waiting for the shout. But Alvaro didn't shout. Alvaro looked at his son, curled up and sleeping peacefully against a damp, dirty jacket. Then he looked back at Lathe. A strange, unreadable expression flickered behind the icy blue of his eyes. "Real," Alvaro murmured. The word sounded foreign in his mouth.